Yes. First item of business is always requests for bill introductions. Do we have any requests? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce RS 0578. For those of you who have served on this committee with me since 2021, you will recall that this is a bill that would provide a sales tax exemption for certain community theaters that meet a particular standard. We've voted it out of this committee twice. We actually got it in conference committee last year. It passed both the House and the Senate in conference committee, but unfortunately the governor vetoed it at a time that we weren't going to be meeting to override her veto, which we certainly had the votes to do. So it's commonly known as the theater bill, and I'm bringing it back.
We'll refer to it as the resurrection bill. Any questions or objections from the committee? Seeing none, the request is approved. Representative Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to respectfully request this sponsorship of this bill on behalf of Representative Bueller. It's RS 0034. And this is an act concerning income tax relating to credits and providing an income tax credit for contributions to a child care provider or an intermediary.
Thank you, Representative. Yep.
I have
Go
one
ahead.
more.
Let's do them one at a time, and I'll ask for any questions or objections. Seeing none, the request is approved. Please continue.
Thank you. I respectfully request the committee to sponsor the introduction of Bill RS 0129. 0129. It's an act concerning property taxation, providing for an increase in amount of income for eligibility of assistance for senior relief credit.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or objections from the committee? Seeing none, the request is approved. Are there further requests for bill introductions? Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have two as well. The first one is 25 RS 0277. What this one does is it creates a community pharmacy, puts them in the same group as far as a sales tax exemption as primary care clinics and healthcare centers that primarily provide services to the medically underserved individuals and families.
Okay. I'm sorry, I was writing, was that 0277?
Correct.
Okay. Committee, any questions or objections? Seeing none, the request is approved. Did you have another one?
Yes, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The second one is 25 RS 0327. You guys probably remember this from last year. This was the bill that mirrored the federal law when it comes to being able to deduct gaming losses against your gaming winnings for tax purposes. We had a hearing on it here. We passed it out of here, but it never went to the floor. So I have that one.
I thought that already became law.
Yeah, it did not.
Any requests or objections?
Sure,
Objection from Representative
Not
Heisel?
just for the record, I didn't introduce this one because the need isn't for me to have to deduct losses this year. I'll just say, just saying,
All right.
guys.
All right, moving on. Any further requests or any objections? Seeing none, the request is approved. Oh, excuse me, Representative Bryce, I'm sorry.
I have two bills to present. I don't have an objection.
Okay.
I didn't know where we were on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two bills also on behalf of Representative Webster Roth. First is 25 RS 0084. It would relate to property taxation, requiring the sales comps to be near the property rather than far away, basically, in a nutshell.
Okay, committee, any questions or objections? Seeing none, the request will be approved. Please continue.
Thank you. One last one is 25RS0063. It would basically freeze homestead taxes on residential property at age 65 so that it could not, or maybe not freeze, but provide a ceiling for residential property taxes at age 65 where they don't increase after that age.
Okay. Any questions or objections from the committee? Seeing none, the request is approved. Representative Awerkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's 250333, and it is allowing for healthcare ministry payments to be deductible in the Kansas income tax returns.
Okay. Any questions or comments, or questions or objections?
Could you repeat that, please? It's hard to hear on
Representative
this side of the
Clayton.
room. Lean into that mic.
Yes. Representative Awerkamp.
So this is a request from a CPA in my district who said, similar to Missouri, he would like Kansas to allow payments for healthcare ministries to be deductible on our income tax liability. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have healthcare ministry defined in statute? Maybe that's a question for the hearing. All right, any questions or objections from the committee? Seeing none, the request is approved. Are there any further requests for bill introductions? Yes, please come forward and state your name and all of the goodies, the RS number and the summary. I don't think your mic is on yet.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the House Tax Committee. My name is Kimberly Genscher-Swati, and I would respectfully request introduction of a bill with the RS number 25RS0225 related to related to energy storage systems.
Is that on behalf of?
On behalf of the Advanced Power Alliance.
Okay, very good.
My apologies.
Committee, any questions or objections? Seeing none, the request is approved.
Thank you.
Are there any further requests for bill introductions? All righty, looks like we've got a little bit of work ahead of us, as if we didn't think so already. Next item, we will go ahead and close the request section. We will move right on to the right. We will have a tour on scheduled for Thursday. Leah has, and do you want to go ahead and pass those out now? Okay. Oh, that's what we've got here. These are an oath of confidentiality. We need to have these signed and returned to Leah if you intend on participating in that tour. We thought it would be easier to just get this in front of the committee here rather than have her chase you down in your offices this week if you wanted to attend that tour. That's what that paper is. Any questions on that? Representative Sanders?
Where is that facility located?
I might, what's the address down there at the, it's the same one we went to a couple years ago. I can't remember.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Department of Revenue. We would be more than happy to bring that address to you tomorrow if that would work. Again, it's at 29th and Topeka. It's the old Dillon store, if that rings any bells.
And we did go there 2 years ago?
I think last year we went there.
Last year, okay.
Eddie said it is 300 Southwest 29th Street.
Thank you, Eddie.
So,
Yes.
yeah,
Thank you.
transportation will be on your own to get down there. They have a large parking lot. I imagine there'll be some security. I haven't read through this, but usually we meet at that side door and they let us in through security there. But we will need to have these returned to Leah if you intend on going to the tour before you arrive there.
and we can finalize all the arrangements. You're right, we did enter in the side door. We believe that's what's going to happen again on Thursday, but we'll finalize that, and I can let you know tomorrow.
Okay, that sounds great. Any questions on Thursday's agenda or the confidentiality agreement? Okay, Representative Sanders.
Thank you. And what time will that tour
Normal
begin?
meeting time, 3:30.
3:30?
Yes.
So, but just be there at 3:30?
Correct. Yeah,
Thank
we
you,
will
Mr.
not come to the committee room here, just be on each person's own cognizance to get down there and we'll start the tour at that normal committee time. Okay, seeing no other questions, at this time, I'd like to welcome the Honorable Secretary Mark Burkhart for a briefing on the Kansas Department of Revenue's annual report. Welcome to committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Mark Burkhart, Secretary of Revenue. Pleasure to see everyone again. You should have made available to you some slides that have been prepared by essentially Kathleen Smith and her financial economists and her tax policy experts. And we'll be going through those schedules rather quickly. You'll see schedules that you've seen before. Most of this information is just the most current available for your education. And I apologize, the first slide that we have is the organizational chart for the department. And if you look at that, you would suspect that maybe I'm a control freak when you have so many different entities reporting to the secretary. That's just the way that it's always been. But as you know, primarily the department has 4 major divisions. Of course, we have our division of taxation, and that's what we'll focus on today. We also have the Alcoholic Beverage Control Division, Property Valuation Division, and of course the Division of Vehicles. So 3 of those won't be mentioned today, although tomorrow afternoon, I believe you'll receive a briefing from Bob Kent in our Property Valuation Division to bring you up to date on some things happening in that division. So not spending too much time on that particular diagram, I would just note to you, and I think most of you are aware of this, there are some individuals within the department that you may have contact with throughout the year when you have constituents with tax issues. One of those is a gentleman by the name of Bob Cleland, who has been with the department for many years. Bob is our taxpayer advocate, and he's very, very helpful. He's been around a long time, and he knows a lot about lots of different taxes, and he's, I'm confident will be able to help you and your constituents, and that's essentially what his job is, just to take those calls and inquiries every day. Moving out of that slide and perhaps into the next one on page 1, I think Eddie gave a very good analysis last week of state receipts in general. Since we're talking about the operations of the Department of Revenue today, what you're hearing today is the discussion or information regarding basically the taxes collected by the Department of Revenue. So this is not every fee that is collected by the state. It's just those that are collected and administered by the Department of Revenue. So if you look on page 1, again, state tax receipts, you can see that last fiscal year, we collected $14.2 billion. And the area of the department that is responsible for most of that is the area that you're going to be touring tomorrow, the channel management area. Channel management has roughly 35 full-time employees, and during the busy tax season, we also bring in 30 to 40 temporary employees to be able to process returns as quickly as we can. And we'll talk a little bit in more detail about how that happens, how that processing occurs in a few more slides. But that will give you a general idea of what is coming into the Department of Revenue.
Mr. Secretary, I apologize, I didn't ask at the beginning. Do you mind if we take questions as committee members might have them throughout the presentation?
Absolutely.
Sometimes when you're discussing a certain slide, there will be a question that pops up, and I'll try to manage the time so we don't get too wrapped up in the details, but they're always good questions. But I think that might be more beneficial if we just take questions as we go through. So committee members, just raise your hand and get my attention if you have a question, and we'll move right along. Did anybody have a question at this point? Representative Avercamp?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you look at the state general fund or the collections by source, how does property tax fit into that? The 20 mills?
Again, we're just talking taxes that are collected by the department, which we don't collect property taxes per se. The department does not.
Yeah, in the tax facts that Eddie went through, that combined all the state and the local taxes, so the property taxes were included in that. I think technically the state property tax is only the 1.5 mils. The 20 mils is actually considered a local school tax, so it will be a local tax even though it's statutory. But the comparison between tax facts that looks at both of those state and local taxes is going to be different than what we're seeing from the department here today. Okay.
I would note on that schedule, is that sufficient? Okay. I would note on that schedule, one item, the corporate income tax section, you'll see 1.4 billion in fiscal year 2024, and I'll break this out again a few slides later. That includes SALT parity payments. So it's corporate income tax plus SALT parity payments. SALT parity payments are significant, and we'll talk about what those are and how we have broken those out. But corporate income tax just by itself is a little bit shy of $800 million for FY24, but we'll have schedules breaking that out. Flipping over to page 2 of the taxes that we collect, you can see how they're split out between state general fund,
Mr.
highway
Secretary,
fund.
maybe this is a bad idea, but we do have another question.
I'm so
Representative Howerton.
sorry. And just to clarify, so the property tax collected by the counties or local, it goes to Department of Revenue, but you don't collect it and then it's distributed? Is that not how that works? I'm just curious why I thought that property tax was going through KDOR.
I might let Eddie explain that a little bit. It does come to the state, but not through Department of Revenue, I
Okay,
believe.
just for clarification in my mind. Thank
Yeah,
you.
the 20 mil property tax levy is levied by the schools and collected by the county treasurers who remit it to the state treasury, but they don't necessarily, and to the credit of the state school district finance fund, actually, which I believe is technically housed within the Department of Education, not within the Department of Revenue.
Yes, Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got a short cord here. There we go. So I think when I think about the tax bill that we passed, the one thing that happened retroactive to 2024 was no tax on Social Security. So that would be reflected in these receipts. Is that fair?
That would not be reflected until we start getting tax returns for tax year 24, which those won't start, well, some of them are coming in now on our web file, but the bulk of that's going to come in and be reflected in April.
Oh, that's a good question. I was going to ask if there was anything that had happened in the special session bill that was reflective in this, but that answers that. Yeah. Okay. All right. Please continue, Mr. Secretary.
Right. Those numbers would be reflected in FY25. Okay. Let's skip over to page 3. again, gives a breakdown of collections, and these are net of refunds, and you can get a sense of what our largest contributors to state general fund are. Of course, individual income tax and corporate income tax, sales and use tax. Those are all large contributors. If you flip over to page 4, you can get a sense of counties that might be in your legislative districts in terms of what the actual collections for the various state taxes are and what it means on a per capita basis. And the information that's provided there has data for individual income tax, the state sales tax, vehicle property tax, and then your real and personal property taxes. So you get a pretty good picture of what your per capita liability is within the counties. Oftentimes we get questions from legislators along those lines. Moving over to page 6, just a breakdown of the various units within the Division of Taxation. Again, I'm not going to spend any time with these. Again, from my perspective, one of the most important areas within the department is the area that you're going to be touring tomorrow, channel management. We have literally millions and millions of documents and payments that come into that area of the department, and they do a remarkable job processing all of that. When you figure they have to receive it and then properly account for it and make sure it gets applied to the proper account very quickly. And we'll talk about income tax in a minute, but all of that is occurring, and even after fraud edits, we are able to get income tax refunds out to taxpayers in a reasonably short period of time. And I'll give you some stats on how quickly those refunds are going out, again, in a few minutes. So moving over to page 7, one of the first of the large taxes is the individual income tax. And you can see that for fiscal year 2024, $4.5 billion was collected. And we, again, won't start seeing the results of Senate Bill 1 until next fiscal year. Keep in mind again, and I'm not sure this is the appropriate time to get into the details, but when we passed the SALT Parity Act, the gist of that is that we would show higher payments being made by corporate entities and less being made by individual income taxpayers, and that's kind of reflected here. But again, we'll have a separate table that breaks all of that out in just a minute. From a tax return perspective, we process about 1.6 million individual income tax returns. About 1.3 million of those are resident Kansas returns. Of those that are filed, roughly 93% are filed electronically. And obviously, from our perspective, filing electronically is the way to go. The error rate on an electronically filed return is like 2 to 3%. For a paper return, you're looking over 15% error rate. So again, electronic filing is the way to go. Moving on to page 8, we also get questions from legislators.
We did have a question from Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do I recall that there was a movement a year or two ago to require electronic filing? Do you have any update on that?
I'm not sure there was a movement to do that. Our sales tax returns are required to be filed electronically. That doesn't happen, but statutorily they're required to be filed. I think sometimes it just, perhaps just the logistics of having all taxpayers being able to access the electronic filing, technology. So I don't recall any legislation, though, having been introduced to do that.
Would you like to see some legislation
We would
introduced
not
to
be
do that?
opposed to that.
Okay. Thank you.
Again,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
that just makes the operation much more efficient.
Seeing no questions, please continue, sir.
Again, on page 8, we often get questions from legislators in terms of how many taxpayers are in different tax brackets and income brackets, and that's all laid out for you very clearly. So we spent a lot of time with this analysis last year when we were looking at all of the various income tax bills. So on page 9, there's another schedule where we also get lots of questions from legislators. How many joint filers do we have? How many single filers do we have? We have a table there breaking out those categories for resident filers and non-resident filers. Again, comes in very handy when we're looking at modifications to our existing tax structure. On page 10, this is something new this year. I think maybe I mentioned it last year, but there may have been a question or two about fraudulent tax returns. And at the top of that page 10, you can see a table that kind of lays out over the last several years what we believe are the true fraudulent tax returns. Now keep in mind, and I can't get into detail here, but our system, our tax processing system, it's an automated system. We have certain parameters programmed into our system where if certain items exceed parameters, those returns get rejected and they get set to a work list. And an individual tax examiner looks at that return to make sure that it is, in fact, accurate. So we may have over 100,000, probably several 100,000 returns get work listed every year for a variety of reasons. That doesn't mean they're fraudulent. It just means there's something there that's a little out of the norm. What these returns are returns where one of our examiners has actually examined the return and determined it to be fraudulent. And so you see in 2024, there's 13,000, almost 14,000. The amount of the refunds that were saved and that were not sent out was 23 million. If you look down at a line item or for 2022, you see that very large number. Some clever individual filed a refund claim for 160 million. So obviously that's why that number is so high for that year. That was not paid.
Mr. Secretary, if you don't mind, I'm just curious. Seemed like in 2023 and 24, there was a very significant increase. Is that due to I mean, do you have any metrics that show why that was? Was there a data breach somewhere? Is there
The
a
increase in 23 and 24 are primarily due to, and these numbers here reflect individual income tax returns and homestead returns. The homestead returns account for the vast majority of those perceived to be fraudulent returns.
Okay, so somebody out there figured out our homestead returns and we're trying to make claims on that.
Or multiple claims
Okay.
by the same individual.
Oh,
Those sorts
okay,
of things.
I see.
Yeah. So that deals with the fraud aspect, but separate and apart from that are the fact that, is the fact that there are a number of taxpayers that are just delinquent in their taxes. It's not a fraudulent tax scheme by any stretch of the imagination. And we're going to talk about this in a few minutes as well. But for the last, for the years, fiscal years 2019, 2021, 2022, 2023, and most recently 2024, the department has set new records for the collection of delinquent taxes. And we're on a pace right now for the current fiscal year to collect nearly $300 million in delinquent taxes. Last year, it was 250 some million. And again, I've got the specifics on a table a little later in this presentation. And you're wondering, well, the department is being terribly aggressive. And I like to think not. You know, there are things that happen in people's lives that, you know, they don't have any control over, and it might affect their ability to pay. And what we try to do is work with those individuals. We can look at their financials, their income, and we can work out pay plans for them. And right now, I think we have between 14 and 15,000 pay plans. And if a taxpayer abides by the terms of the pay plan, the department has statutory discretion to deal with penalties that might have been imposed. So I think in general, that's the type of situation that we have. We work with individuals to understand their financial situation and then work with them. Now, outside of that, we also have individuals that have really no interest in paying. And this probably goes more out of the individual income tax area and more so in the sales tax. So you have situations where a retailer collects sales tax on the sales, and instead of remitting that to the department, they might use it for their own personal uses. Obviously, we take that very seriously. And we do have an agreement, a memorandum of understanding with the Office of the Attorney General. And given the right cases and the right circumstances, we do prosecute those cases for tax fraud. But it's generally in the area of sales tax. So, moving on, are there any questions along those lines?
Looks like we're good. Please continue.
On page 11, kind of breaks out the number of returns, individual income tax returns that have been filed. And again, 93% of those are electronic returns. So that concludes my overview of individual income tax. Moving on to corporate income tax and privilege tax, you can see this table, and this is where the corporate income tax number differs from the earlier table, because this truly is only corporate income tax. So for fiscal year 2024, $781 million in corporate income tax was collected. And keep in mind that the corporate income tax is paid only by C corporations. So limited liability companies, partnerships, corporations that have an S corporation election in place, those are all pass-through entities. None of those are in any way connected with this number. This is truly a C corporation where they pay, the corporations pay tax under Kansas taxable income. I'm not going to go through the mechanics of how the corporate income tax is computed, but last year you looked at some legislation, and I think you'll see it again this year. When we deal with corporations that operate in multiple states, a portion of that income is apportioned back to the state of Kansas and taxed by Kansas. Right now, it's basically a property, payroll, and sales apportionment formula. Last year, there was a bill, several bills, I think, to look at the prospect of, or the possibility of switching to a single factor sales formula that most every state now has done. At least the vast majority of states have done that. Kansas is one of the few states that hasn't. And again, I think we'll be prepared to give you the sort of the whole history of how that transition has occurred over time. But in general, just as a general proposition, a single factor sales formula benefits Kansas companies that make products and sell them out of state. So it lowers their Kansas tax exposure. So I would also note that the Kansas corporate income tax rate is a bit lower now because of the Apex project. Our normal corporate income tax rate, which was 4% with a 3% surtax, that normal rate was dropped to 3.5% starting this fiscal year, or I'm sorry, this calendar year. On the next page, page 13, again, this gives a little more detail in terms of the salt parity receipts. And you can see that in fiscal year 2023, we had $611 million in salt parity payments made and $637 million in 2024. Now, just as a refresher on this subject matter, and this has been one of the areas that has generated the most questions for the department over the last couple of years, and it's a program that means absolutely nothing to the state of Kansas from a revenue perspective. Essentially, what has happened prior to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act at the federal level, prior to that in 2017 and prior, individuals could deduct their state and local taxes. There was no cap. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017 at the federal level imposed a $10,000 limitation, a $10,000 cap. What the Salt Parity Act did, and it was enacted in 2022 in Kansas, it was enacted to allow individuals who receive income from pass-through entities, LLCs, S corporations, partnerships. It allows them to have the corporation or the entity make an election where the entity would pay the tax on the income, and then when that income is passed through to the shareholders, owners, members, they get a credit for the taxes that were previously paid by the entity. What this does, it just basically moves the tax incidence from individual taxpayers who were subject to the cap to the entity where there is no cap. So all state and local taxes then could be deducted at the entity level, and all of this maneuvering means nothing to the state of Kansas. It was designed to be a wash.
Along those lines, Mr. Secretary, have you, in your tax administrators groups, is anybody anticipating any changes? I know with the result of the November election, a lot of people anticipate that some of these provisions that were set to expire will be continued, but that's going to be a congressional act. Is there any discussion around salt parity or any of these items that we might need to be concerned about?
There's no consensus in terms of what those things might be, but there are proposals out there, instead of having a $20,000 or a $10,000 cap, bump it up to $20,000. But unless something's done, that cap's going to disappear. Now the question will be, will entities still elect, because this is going to still be Kansas law, will entities still elect to pay the tax on behalf of their members and shareholders, instead of having them make estimated tax payments on income that they think they're going to receive and taxes that they're going to have to pay. Just let the entity pay it, and then we'll true up at the end of the day. So who knows? It's just an unknown at this point in time. But there certainly will be legislation at the federal level that speaks to salt parity.
But at the end of the day, as you said, it should be a wash for Kansas. It's just a matter of if it's corporate income or personal income, where it shows up.
As you will recall, and maybe you won't, but last year we came to the committee with a number of technical corrections. And those technical corrections were brought forward by the department in order to make certain that this was a revenue neutral approach to taxation. Because the way the original bill was written, some taxpayers could actually end up paying a liability, an additional liability, and the technical corrections we did last year took care of that situation. So that's all for salt parity. Moving on to page 14, again, very briefly here, this is the privilege tax on banks and savings and loans. And this is not an income tax. This is a tax on the privilege of doing business in the state. And you're wondering, why does it need to be different than an income tax? And the reason is, as I understand, historically, you can't tax interest on federal obligations. And banks have a lot of those, so the state could not impose a tax on those. You get around that by not imposing a tax on the income per se. We're paying a fee for the privilege of doing banking in the state of Kansas. I would note that Senate Bill 1 that was passed during the special session lowered the tax rate, the base tax rate, the normal tax rate for banks and savings and loans on a comparable amount to that for corporations, where again, the base rate or the normal rate was dropped 0.5% because of Apex. The rates for privileged institutions was also dropped. So moving over to page 15, again, gives a bit of information to you. And again, we get lots of questions from legislators on these items. Who pays, who's paying these taxes? And if you look at the table on the top of the page, you can see that roughly for corporations, 4.1% of the corporations, that's 938 corporations, pay 91.5% of the tax, or 565.2 million. So larger entities are paying the bulk of the tax. It's also interesting that of the 22,799 corporations, and these are C corporations, 12,342 don't pay anything. So, and then the bottom schedule, and you can see there are not that many banks and savings and loans in the state, and you can see a breakout of how those payments are allocated among the income brackets. Okay, moving on to page 16 then, retailer sales and compensating use taxes. Again, this is just the state component of those taxes. This does not reflect in any way the local levies. And you can see that for 2024, the total state and state and sales and use tax was 3.5 billion. And that's a little bit less than the prior year, 1.1%, and you can factor perhaps the reduction in the food sales tax as being a factor in that. It is interesting to see the transition that has occurred in the compensating use tax based upon work that had been done a few years ago after the Wayfair decision came down from the United States Supreme Court. And it doesn't show it here, but when you look at the state use tax line, you have 2019, FY 2019. The year prior to that, which was the fiscal year immediately preceding the Wayfair decision out of the Supreme Court, use tax collections were $406 million. And so when Wayfair come down, and Wayfair just basically said the state can require out-of-state retailers to collect and remit, even though they don't have a substantial physical presence in the state of Kansas. There was no change in the law. It's just a question of the court, authorizing the collection of those taxes. So you went from $406 million in 2019 to $860 million in FY 2024. Implementing the Wayfair decision was part of that. Another part, the committee passed legislation requiring marketplace facilitators to collect and remit. So again, you have an out-of-state retailer who may not be making direct sales into the state. They may be using a third-party platform, marketplace facilitator, to sell into the state. Well, that marketplace facilitator has to collect and remit. For FY 2024, in excess of $120 million of that $861 million came from marketplace facilitators. So,
Mr. Secretary, we did have a quick question here. Representative Averkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I go back to the salt parity portion. You had mentioned the possibility, well, the salt cap expiring in tax year 2025. And you mentioned something about, if the federal government allows that to expire, the current situation in Kansas and state statute is kind of how individuals, if the cap's gone, then individuals can, ultimately we go back to what we used to do, where individual pays their income taxes and deducts it from their federal. So can you talk about if we don't change anything in our current statute and the cap expires at the federal level, what happens? Is there a problem?
there is not a problem, if you will. If the cap expires, and it will unless Congress acts by the end of the year, taxpayers will have the option at that point in time, whether they wanted to go back to the way it was, where on pass-through income coming from LLCs and pass-through entities, that they would pay tax, or they could still have the entity elect to have the entity pay it, and the same mechanism would stay in place. There's nothing that I can recall in the legislation that ties this to the $10,000 cap at the federal level.
So both options still exist now, and if the cap expires, both options will continue.
Exactly. It's just elective with the entity and its owners.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, please continue.
On page 17, again, just breaks out what the department receives in terms of sales and use tax returns. And this is one of those areas where the returns are statutorily mandated to be filed electronically, but that doesn't happen. And we still have paper returns that come in, but in large part, probably in excess of 98% do file electronically. On page 18 and 19, very much like the earlier schedule, which broke out on a per capita basis, certain taxes, here we have the total amount of state sales tax collections by county over several years, and then the per capita computation as well. Again, oftentimes we get requests from legislators for that data. Moving over to the Next page then, on page 20, shows the current motor fuel tax receipts. And as you know, currently the motor fuel tax is at 20, the actual excise tax is 24 cents a gallon. There's a 1 cent environmental fee, so at 25 cents a gallon. Diesel fuel, just a penny higher. I'm sorry, 2 pennies higher at 27 cents a gallon. And you'll see that there hasn't been much variation in motor fuel tax receipts. There was discussion in prior sessions. There'll be discussions this session about electric vehicles and how those should be addressed in terms of the funding of Kansas highways. In 2023, there was House Bill 2004. It imposed I think a 3 cent per kilowatt hour tax. Obviously, that didn't go anywhere. So far this year, I believe Representative Riley introduced House Bill 2003, which also imposes a per kilowatt hour charge. So we'll see how this all plays out. I can tell you that right now we have roughly 3 million registered vehicles. That's new registrations or renewals. And just a pure electric vehicle, there are 17,000 of those registered in the state. And if you go beyond just a pure EV, if you're looking at hybrids, when you look at everything, we're looking at maybe 75 to 77,000 vehicles connected in some way to being at least partially electric. So 77,000 out of the 3 million. I think other states are trying to determine what would be appropriate in terms of having EV owners contribute to the funding of state highways. So there'll be plenty of interesting discussions. On page 21, just a very quick summary of mineral severance tax receipts. Again, mineral severance tax, it's all based on price and production. So you can see how things have changed over the years. Not going to spend much more time on that. Moving to page 22, this is an area that, quite frankly, is very confusing to taxpayers who are trying to obtain some relief from property taxes, and it's the homestead relief legislation. You know, right now we have 3 separate plans under which taxpayers can file, and this is probably one of the areas where we see the most confusion from folks. The most recent plan, which came into play, would allow certain taxpayers to receive a refund of property taxes paid beyond a base amount. So you establish a base year, and any taxes beyond that would be refunded. And it was a pretty limited group that would be able to do this. But some taxpayers read that and they think they get all of their property taxes back. So they file claims for all of their property taxes. Those are the types of returns that get kicked out automatically and then get worked by hand by one of our examiners. So I think it would be a worthy endeavor to simplify this area for taxpayers. Provide them relief, but do it in a way that is perhaps simpler to understand and accomplish the objective.
Mr. Secretary, we have a question from Representative Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The numbers you put in your chart, is that include all three programs, or is that just the original homestead refund program?
Those numbers, that's the aggregate of all programs. I'm trying to determine, I thought I had even the specific numbers for the basic first homestead program that we had. 52,000 claims were filed under it for 12.8 million in refunds. And the second program, the selective assistance for effective senior relief, another, the sort of the second component of the program, 6,300 taxpayers filed under that for 8.5 million. And then the most recent one, the SVR program, where again, you establish the base and you get a refund for taxes paid above that. There were 11,641 homeowners claiming 2.6 million. So all of those dollars are tied in to this schedule.
Okay, so what's interesting then is, although we've added the different ways they can do it, the total number of claims has actually gone down, and actually the amount paid has gone down from 2017. Is that because of the income? I mean, people's income grew to fewer people qualify?
There are income limitations that does affect the numbers that can claim. So, and of course, a bill's already been introduced this session, House Bill 2005, which the Valor legislation, which would provide refunds for disabled veterans who are unemployable. So I think it may have been debated last year even. So on page 23, again, this is sort of a repeat of what I had talked about earlier. It kind of shows you the collection of accounts receivables. And you can see that for fiscal year 2024, 259 million was collected. Right now, we're on a pace, we're about 15%, 10 to 15% ahead of last year's pace. So we're going to be close to 300 million in the collection of accounts receivable for this fiscal year. And at the table at the top, you can kind of see what taxes contribute to those accounts receivable. And it's primarily individual income tax and sales tax. So.
Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious, so if we're on track to collect 300 million, how much is left outstanding?
It varies from day to day. I mean, we always have accounts coming into the system, but you're looking at several hundred million still. So we can bring those numbers down, but they are always bumping back up.
And on a follow-up question, thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you have like a chart that shows like how old this debt is and?
Absolutely, we do. We have an aging chart that will provide the committee. So had I been thinking, I would have had it in here, but yeah. I think part of the improved collections relates to the fact that there's not much delay before the department acts and notifies the taxpayer that you owe this. In years past, these accounts would sit around for a long, long time before the taxpayer was even notified. That has changed, and some of it is just due to the upgrades to our electronic processing systems that have come about over the last couple of years. Page 24, just gives you some basic updates. I think I've mentioned a lot of these things already in terms of electronic filing and how successful that is. At the bottom of that page, there's a chart that gives you an idea of the volume of correspondence that the department receives every year. Sometimes it seems I get 240,000 coming to my office at times. But it's, this is one of those areas where our customer service reps do an excellent job trying to get back to taxpayers. And when, on that bottom chart, when it talks about percentage of calls answered, that is a situation where somebody may call in, they might leave a message, and we have to get back and talk to a human being before it's considered a completed call. So that's how we come up with that percentage. We're also trying to use a little more technology in terms of chatbots. When taxpayers call in for basic information, we can deal with that through some pretty comprehensive instructions that might be provided through a chatbot. Moving over to page 25, again, this is just kind of a summary of what our initiatives were and what our plans were last fiscal year, and you can again see the volume of returns that have come in and the refunds that were paid, 937,000. So we're very pleased with that. One of the things that we did, and we did this in-house with the assistance of the Information Network of Kansas, we established, I think we actually set it up in 2023, our own payment portal where somebody could go online without having to set up a special account with the department, just go online to this portal and make a tax payment. And to date, we're looking at 106,000 transactions for 308 million came in through that portal that was, again, developed in-house without any third-party vendor. So I guess for last year's, what we would deem to be accomplishments, we did, and you'll see this tomorrow, complete the channel modernization. It was quite a task to convert all old tax forms, which were in the hundreds, to the new system. And it took several years, and I've had questions asked by other legislators, maybe in the budget context, why did it take so long to upgrade your system? And the reason is we have very limited time during a year when we can go in and make adjustments to our operating system. We can't do it during tax season because it affects everything. And we can't do it during the extended tax season later in the year when we get several 100,000 extended tax returns. So when we're talking about doing upgrades from a technology side in our systems, we're looking at a couple months during the summer, probably June, July, and August. Because, September, we already start getting estimated tax payments in September, and then extended tax returns coming in October. So that was 2024. For 2025, the actual processing season will begin January 27th when the IRS activates its system. So all the returns that were filed with the federal return will hit our system then, and we will begin processing returns, running the fraud edits, and our expectation is, again, for an individual income tax return that is filed electronically and that has asked for an electronic deposit of the refund, we can get that back in 3 to 7 days, and probably on the lower end of that. If that same taxpayer files electronically but asks for a paper return, you're looking at a couple weeks. And if you file a paper return and on a paper check, you're looking at probably 30 days. And this all assumes, of course, that your return hasn't been marked for review by an individual examiner because it's just been kicked out because of our edits. So one thing that's a little different this year, and you may have heard the IRS is expanding its use of direct file. It's a free filing platform with the IRS, and it's not totally available to all taxpayers. Only certain types of income for taxpayers can be reported through this system. And Kansas is one of the states that is working with the IRS on that. I don't know, there's 24 or 25 states. And all we have done, this is not a situation where the return is filed with the IRS and then that information is extracted and sent to Kansas. That's not the way it's done. All we have done is we have provided a link to the IRS to our own free file system, WebEx, web file, I'm sorry, that's been in Kansas for, I don't know, in the 90s, I think, which again, any taxpayer in Kansas can use that. So, we're hoping that we'll get more usage of our web file because of all of the returns that we receive, maybe 25, 30,000 actually use web file. And it's very simple to use, and we encourage taxpayers to use it. It's free and very efficient. So I guess the last thing I would mention is the department has a lot of expertise that is held by a lot of individuals who are not young. And over the next few years, we're going to see a transition of historical knowledge out the door. And we have been and will continue to develop that next level of management that's going to step up and continue the operations at the Department of Revenue. So things that the legislature has done recently, and I don't think you appreciate or can appreciate how beneficial the work that you've done in terms of making employee salaries more competitive, but I can tell you that the morale and the desire to stay on these jobs has been significantly improved with the work that you've done over the last several years. So again, we're trying to develop the professionalism within the department staff and maintain that expertise in years to come. Who knows, if AI gets really developed, maybe none of us will be needed anymore. I don't know, but that's probably going to be a while. So I don't think AI has empathy, but maybe it does. So that's all I have today, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you very much for that comprehensive report, Mr. Secretary. Are there any final questions? Representative Howerton.
Thank you. More of a statement. Please don't ever let Bob Clellan retire. He has to stay there forever. And he can't die either.
I'm sure he's watching you say that.
He is phenomenal. He's been a big help, so I really appreciate him.
Now, Bob Clellan is really one of the more significant assets at the department. He is a consummate problem solver and has helped lots of taxpayers work through difficult situations.
Representative Corbett.
Thanks, Chairman. You have very many of your employees either working from home or off-site.
Yes, we have quite a few. I can tell you roughly 60% of our workforce is has some degree of remote work, a hybrid schedule, if you will. And The areas of the department where we utilize that the most are those areas of the department where we can, in real time, determine an employee's productivity. Accounts receivable collection. We know what every employee is doing at any moment of the day, and that's the area where we're setting records year after year after year, and those folks have basically been working from home.
So basically, if they're doing the same job, are they paid the same whether they're on site or at home?
That is correct.
And my last one, what concerns me a little bit, you've got so many people working from home. What if they, like slip on the sidewalk or do something while they're working, just like they'd be at your place? So what kind of limits of, injuries could come up that would get you in mind?
I'm not sure, since that is their premises, that is not the workplace per se. I don't know, I'll ask our general counsel about that, but it's a good question. I will tell you that employees that have the opportunity to do some remote work, they have to sign an agreement with the department with certain performance standards. And if they're not met, you're back in the office.
Thank you.
And yeah, it's, how do I want to say this? From my vintage, being in the office every day, that's what we're accustomed to. I mean, I've been in the office every day. I've never done remote work. But I may not be a big fan of that in its entirety, but what I am a big fan of is having a workforce at the department where the positions are filled. And I can tell you that remote work is a very big factor for employees. And when we post a job and we indicate that there might be a limited hybrid work opportunity, we'll get 25 applications. If it's in the office, we get 0. It's a very interesting situation. And again, not one that when I came into the department, I had, again, I was totally unfamiliar with remote work, but what's the job of the administrators? The job of the administrators is make sure your workers are productive and you're accomplishing the statutory missions to which you've been assigned. And I think we've been doing that with our hybrid approach.
Representative Clayton?
I was just going to ask in that vein, how many positions you currently have open, whether they're part-time or FTE, and what that is looking like for you?
I asked my chief information or chief financial officer the other day, and we have 1,039 authorized positions, and I thought the number he gave me was 1,035 are filled. That's not always been the case.
Right. Committee, any further questions? Seeing none. Mr. Secretary, thank you again for your presentation. Committee, at this time, in the interest of time, we are going to go ahead and bump the CORA overview till tomorrow, and that way we can go ahead and pull up our hearing for House Bill 2004, and I'll go ahead and turn to the revisor's office for a summary on that bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2004 would provide countywide retailer sales tax authority for Seward County. Under the bill, Seward County have the authority to submit a proposition to the electors to impose a countywide retailer sales tax in an amount of 0.5% and pledging the revenue received therefrom for the purpose of financing the costs of roadway and bridge construction, maintenance, and improvements. The tax would expire after 10 years, but subsequent elections could reauthorize the tax for additional 10-year periods. Revenues generated by the imposition of this sales tax would be retained by the county and expended only for the purposes for which the revenue was pledged. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Siebers. Committee, any questions for the revisor? Seeing none, thank you, Adam. Okay, I we'll go ahead and open up the proponent section of our testimony and welcome first to committee April Warden.
Good afternoon. My name is April Warden. I am the Seward County Administrator, and I just want to thank you, Chairman Smith, and all the members of the House Taxation Committee for allowing us the opportunity to come and testify before you today. First off, I want to say how blessed we are out in Southwest Kansas that we have a lot of exciting things going on, new technology, new economic development. So we're very grateful for that, but with that has brought some concerns of our roadways, and we know that we must keep up with our continued growth and the safety for our citizens. Most of the construction of our roads back in the day in Seward County were not built to handle the excessive traffic that we have now. We have a lot of heavy trucks that are traveling up and down our roads. Also, we have a lot of family farms, and farm equipment has changed a lot over the years. And so our roadways just simply were not built up to the standards that they need today. And obviously, we didn't have the safety concerns that back in the day that we have now as well. Recognizing that our roadways are crucial, the commissioners and myself have hired Kirkham and Michael as civic engineers. They came out and they helped us assess all of our roads, including the 137 miles of asphalt that we have, and they did core samples on all of those asphalt roads, as well as looked at the 446 miles of gravel roads we have, and then we have 100 miles of just earth dirt roads. The commissioners have been meeting quarterly to have strategic planning sessions as well as town hall meetings with our community, where they've looked at what we have in reserves, ways that we can fund all of the budget constraints that we've had due to inflation of materials, locating and being able to afford the aggregate that we need, fuel, parts for our equipment, workforce issues. I know other people have been up here. You guys just had conversation about workforce. And there's just a large fraction of our roads that have deteriorated over time, whether that be from the major drought conditions that we had as well. So through those strategic planning sessions, and we've heard the people of our community speak loud and clear that they want no more added property tax. We have applied for grants. We did receive a high-risk rural roads grant as well as a cost share grant for one of our projects. But we're coming before you today to please ask for your consideration in allowing us a half-cent sales tax to be able to take that back to our community and allow them to vote on whether or not they would see fit to vote for the half-cent sales tax to help pay for some of the cost and repairs to our road and bridge department. I did want to let this committee know that last year our budget for road and bridge was $3.7 million. We did have a mill levy just for road and bridge last year of 9.871. And with that, the help that we do receive from the state in fuel tax was $680,000. So you can see there's quite a difference in trying to meet our needs and the costs that are associated with that. I could certainly share a lot more, but I just want to say, sitting through that and seeing what you guys will deal with day to day, I have a lot of respect for you and all of the issues, and I know that we're just one of those issues. So I thank you for your time and letting me speak today, and I certainly will answer any questions that anybody may have of us as well.
Thank you, April. I think we'll take questions at the end of the proponent testimony, but thank you for your testimony. Next, welcome County Commissioner Scott Carr.
Chairman Smith and Taxation Committee, I also thank you for letting me come and testify before you today on behalf of Seward County. I'll just give you some nuts and bolts what our problem is with our asphalts in Seward County. Recently, the High Plains Ponderosa Dairy in Meade County, it's right on our county line. They're expanding that dairy to 40,000 head from 16,000. So all that milk is going to go up to Hillmar up at Dodge. So when you think about dairies, think how much feed that takes. So silage truck, they cut corn silage in August. Instead of 25 loads of corn off of the field, you get like 125 semi-loads of silage. So, and it's massive. It's nonstop. And also, now they're starting to cut silage in spring as well. Triticale, it's a hybrid between wheat and rye. So they're starting to cut that in spring. So we have it in June, then we have silage in August. And that doesn't just apply to the dairies, it's all the cattle feeder operations we have. We have one of the largest, national beef, one of the largest producers there in southwest Kansas for cattle and production. We got cobalt feeders, same thing, they use silage, so it's a constant battle with silage trucks. Also, we have the ethanol plant in Seward County. If you think about that, they use roughly 100,000 bushels a day for ethanol. So you ship all that grain in, guess what? You ship it all back out. The distiller's grain goes back out to the feedlots. So it's nonstop there. They'll put like 3 million bushels of grain on the ground. Then they have silos, about 3 million bushels, but it's all year just bringing grain in. So that's a lot of our extra truck traffic. Also, we had the milk transport, cotton transport. We got a huge cotton warehouse there sitting in Seward County as well. So like April said, our number one cause, we got to be safe about it too, running that many truckloads up and down. I think just the ethanol plant, it's like 55,000 truckloads. That's just for the grain. So I just want to thank you again for letting us come and put our case before you. So we hope you consider us for House Bill 2004. So thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I think we'll take questions now. I'll make the first comment. I started my day with pancakes and we're ending our day with this. So you guys have had a great day here today. Committee, are there any questions? I just have one, Commissioner. What is your current county levied tax rate? Is there a city rate as well? But what is your current approved county sales tax?
9.25. Where's it? Yes.
Yes, sales tax.
9.25.
So that's with the state rate and the city rate?
City and county.
Okay. Okay. These bills are, as you probably well know, are kind of more of a technicality, but I want to make sure we have plenty of opportunity for questions, if there are any further questions.
Just a little tidbit on the financials. We plan to do 28 miles this spring, but to do the whole 137 miles of asphalt, it'd take us another 25 million, do 10 miles a year. So then if we do crack and seals, that'd add another 6.5 million for maintenance over the years. So we just don't want to add that burden onto property taxes. This way we spread it out. Fuel for all those silage trucks, they all come from out of state, basically. So if we can spread some of that cost and repairs to other people, we need to do it.
Do you have an estimate on what the 0.5% would bring in when it passes?
2 million.
2 million a year? Okay. Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, can you talk to us a little bit about your last 5-year county values, what they've done?
Actually, our county values, I think they've been pretty stagnant. We're kind of in a strange position right now. Southwest Kansas has been high gas production since the 40s. Well, gas has been going down, but our other industries have been coming up. We're only reliant on about 10%, I believe now, on oil and gas. So I worked in oil and gas for 40 years. So, Southwest Kansas, we're sucking it out now in compression. So
Thank you. Any further questions, committee? Representative Francis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, for bringing this forward today. Can you talk just a little bit about, I think there were some plans made maybe at one time with the ethanol plant as far as potential property tax receipts and things of that nature to help pay for some of the improvements that you're asking for today. What has happened on some of the where they've appealed the property tax valuations? Are those things, have they came out yet?
No, the results, we're supposed to find out at the, I think, mid-February, isn't it, April? And what he's referring to the Boda case with the ethanol plant that we have, which has gone on way too long. Yes. It's been, what, 4 or 5 years now? So if we could get those decisions made within a couple of years, it sure would help.
Chairman, they are taking final remarks, closing remarks on February the 23rd in regards to that particular case has gone all the way to the district court now. But as Chairman Carr mentioned, they're only, this case has gone on for so long that only goes through years 2018. So we're now at year 2025. So that could have a huge impact one way or the other on us. And what we're seeing is other industries are picking up on and really watching as to how this is going to go too. So it could have a greater effect on us as well as just besides the ethanol plant.
All right, one last opportunity. Committee, any questions? Representative Carlin.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, and I can't remember, I used to be on local government, in local government, and I know that you said this will bring in $2 million a year, and that doesn't build very many miles of anything.
We're trying to do 10 miles a year of blacktop.
So my question, though, is do you have other sources to do this project with? I mean, it's not, do you have other kinds of funds that you're going to use?
We have our special highway fund that comes
Okay, you have other funds that you, so this will really be a boost to you then?
Yes, it will.
Because it seems to me that it's going to take you a long time to do this at the cost of bridges and roads.
Luckily, we only have one, we have 6 bridges, but we don't have a lot of bridges.
So so this is adequate. I know we have a cap on what they can do, so I just, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you once again for coming down. Thanks for the pancakes and sausage this morning. Always a great time.
Yes, we'd love to see you on Pancake Day. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to appear as a proponent on House Bill 2004? Any opponents or neutral testimony? Didn't think so. Seeing none, we'll close the hearing, and body, that completes our work for the day. I apologize. I went past 5 o'clock just a little bit, but we are adjourned.